Morning. How are you all?
Morning, morning. Please, everybody be seated. Thank you. Let me just say it's a very great pleasure on behalf of all of us here at the Pentagon to welcome the Vice President Al Gore here with us today. For those of you who follow what goes on over in Congress, you will know that over the years, Al Gore has taken a very special interest in national security issues. He is one of a relative handful of people on Capitol Hill who is a real student of the national security and national security issues. He did that both as a member of the House of Representatives and as a member of the Senate. So I think that it's especially appropriate that when he launched this program that he's going to talk to you about today, the National Performance Review to make government work better, one of the first things he did was to steal one of our top-notch management people, Bob Stone, to be the project director of the National Review team. Stand up, Bob. The National Performance Review is an extremely important mission, one that the Vice President is going to talk to you about today, and I think he wants a lot of your input. It is to streamline and revitalize government, to make it more action-oriented, and to cut away the frustrating bottlenecks, and I'm sure that many of you deal with on a day-to-day basis and can give him some first-hand knowledge and first-hand experience. Today, the Vice President really wants to hear from you. You, the people who make this department work every day and know from your own experience what we can do to make it work better. So now, ladies and gentlemen, it is a very great pleasure for me to introduce to you the Vice President of the United States, Al Gore. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you. Thank you very much. It's a great honor for me to be here and to have a chance to visit with all of you and to exchange ideas with you. As Secretary Ash indicated, I want to spend most of the time we have together in a two-way dialogue, and I want to spend most of that time listening and learning from you. I want to brag a little bit on Secretary Ashton here at the beginning because he and I served together for a long time in the House of Representatives, and we worked on national security issues. We fought a lot of battles together, and we got criticized together, and we've taken a lot of flack together, and we've won a lot of victories together. And I am really proud to have a chance to serve in this administration with Secretary Ashton. I'm deeply honored. Bring me that up. Is it on now? Okay. Over in the holding room, they said, "Where to?" Just in case we got a problem. Well, bring me the other one, and we'll. Thank you. I get it. What I say is that I'm deeply honored that the Joint Chiefs are here for this meeting. I really appreciate that very much, and Secretary Deutsch, John Deutsch, and I have worked together for a long time also, and Chairman Powell. The President had some awful nice words to say about Chairman Powell yesterday in the Rose Garden, and of course, as everyone knows, very well deserved, and we are deeply honored by your career and your service, General Powell, and as your replacement was announced yesterday, I want to again express our country's thanks to you for the outstanding job you've done as Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. And General Charlie Castillo got off to a pretty good start yesterday, and I think the Well, anyway, he got off to a real good start yesterday. Let me also brag on Bob Stone, who was mentioned by Secretary Ashton. I have learned a lot from the Department of Defense during this National Performance Review. I think most of you probably know what this is all about. All over our country, organizations, both in the private sector and in the public sector, are trying to come to grips with the new realities in our world. We don't do things the same way now that we did 150 years ago, but a lot of organizations are still sort of structured the way they were 100 years ago. And old habits die very hard, and old organizational patterns die very hard. And sometimes you need to kind of shake things up a little bit and do things differently and more efficiently and make better use of the creative talents of the men and women who are in the organization. I think, and I said this to the Joint Chiefs and Secretary Ashton, Secretary Deutsch earlier, I think probably the general public is not aware of what many in Washington, D.C. know about the Department of Defense, and that is that the image that came from the $600 toilet seats and all of those things that you all have heard about so frequently you probably want to gag when they're recalled to you again. The impression that came from all of that is rapidly becoming out of date, because with the end of the Cold War and the recognition by the Department of Defense that revolutionary changes were coming, things began to get shaken up in the Department of Defense before they began in the rest of the federal government. And as a result, some of the most creative and best examples of the new and better ways to do things now exist in the Department of Defense. I was telling General McPeak, I went down to visit the Air Combat Command in Southern Virginia and found there an example of first-class, world-class organization, an organization that is world-class, that implements the very best ideas in a very impressive way. Some of the changes that you have been asked to deal with are more far-ranging than those the rest of the government has had to deal with. And you have accepted that challenge in an extremely impressive way, and I want to compliment you on the dramatic progress that has been made over the last several years. And one of the messages that I want to convey as I talk about the results of this National Performance Review in September and throughout the fall is that there are a lot of good things going on. It's not all bad. And the other point that I want to make before I go to your comments and questions is that in undertaking this challenge, I found 500 previous comprehensive efforts to reform and change the way the federal government operates. I haven't found any of them in the previous 500 that relied mainly on federal employees, rank-and-file federal employees, as the source of the information necessary to do the job. And that's what we're doing. That's why I'm here. I want to learn from you. Because in the private sector, the organizations that have done the best job of transforming themselves or reinventing themselves, if you will, are the ones that have discovered that their most valuable asset is the creativity and the unused brain power of the men and women who work right where the rubber meets the road. And for so many years, since the Industrial Revolution, we have operated on the theory that the people who actually do the work can't be trusted to make decisions or to think or to have any imagination or to come up with any new ideas. They can only be useful to the organization if they are told and directed to do the same thing over and over and over again and nothing else. The decision-making power, that's reserved for a very few at the top of the organization. And once the decisions are made, the instructions are handed down through the hierarchy until it gets to the people who actually do the work. Well, that's obsolete. And organizations that have realized that men and women at the bottom rungs of the ladder have brains and creativity and the capacity to understand how they fit in to the overall mission of the entire organization. And organizations that have then encouraged those men and women to use their creativity and come up with new ideas about how to do things better. And then they harvest those ideas, and they ask the same men and women to help implement those ideas. Those are the organizations that now work the best and compete most successfully. Those are also the organizations, incidentally, where the men and women who that work in them enjoy life the most, and at least enjoy their work life the most, because their work lives have a little bit more to them. In any event, I want to ask you here this morning for your ideas about some of the changes that you think need to be made. And I want to encourage you to think expansively, because we're going to have a sweeping report this fall. And, of course, the bottoms-up review, which will be announced this fall, is yet another example of the phenomenon that I described earlier. Hold on just a second. Let the record reflect that is a commercial airplane. You would never allow something like that to happen. The bottoms-up review is yet another example of the kind of thing I mentioned earlier, and that is the Defense Department kind of leading the way and now being out in front of the kinds of changes that the rest of the government is trying to figure out how to make. But in any event, I want to hear from you, and I'd like to ask some questions. And do we have microphones that spread around? I believe we do. So feel free to raise your hand and get involved in this. Let me ask you, first of all, for an example of some regulation or requirement, some rule, some practice that you have to follow that is totally crazy and doesn't make any sense and prevents you from delivering the kind of service that you would like to deliver, or doing the quality work that you'd like to do, or saving the taxpayers' money, or all three. Does anybody have an example of some totally nonsensical regulation or requirement that stands in the way of doing the kind of job that you'd like to do? Who's got a hand up? There you go. Okay. Thanks for breaking the ice. We'll bring the microphone to you.
Good morning, Vice President. Can you hear me?
Yes.
The policy or the procedure that I have is travel vouchers. Many of the people you see standing out.
Somebody else having a problem with that?
Many of the people you see sitting and standing out here today do a lot of travel in support of our military mission. And we in Department of Defense, and I assume all of federal government, have developed a travel policy where we establish per diem for different...
I think we can hear you. Go ahead.
We've established per diem rates for different areas upon which to travel to. In order to figure out those per diem rates, you have to take into consideration what time you leave home, because that may affect whether you're paid for a full meal or not. It appears that as long as we've had people traveling and the type of information that we would have in the database, that we as a country could come up with some form of standard per diem that we would allow people to use in travel. That would prevent a lot of us from using a lot of time filing travel vouchers, trying to validate time for travel, and attempt to figure out what the per diem rate is going to be. Those hours saved should be time that we could use to be proactive and reinvent government the way you want us to.
Okay. That sounds like a good suggestion. Hold the microphone. Take the microphone back here just for a second. How much paperwork do you have to fill out to validate your per diem?
All right, first you start off for us with a form called the 1610. You have to pick up a telephone and try to find out from a travel source what your cost is going to be for the mode of travel, let's say an airplane. You then have to figure out what the per diem rate, and it goes into the 1610. If for some reason you're over by $1 or $2, when the 1610 is only supposed to be an estimate, it's kicked back to you to redo. Once you then come back from travel, you have a travel voucher that you then have to complete with a multitude of copies, your orders, and whatever else you use as you travel, and send that into a place and wait for them to reimburse you with the hope that you'll get the money back in time before your Diners Club bill comes that the government issues you.
Okay, I've got it. Well, at least you get to fly in a straight line from place to place, right?
Not necessarily so, sir. It depends on who the cheapest. It depends on who has won the contract for the airline carrier. But many times, sir, we can fly cheaper by finding another airline.
Well, you're kidding. I thought the federal government, since it buys in bulk, would get the cheapest fare.
That is not true, sir.
Not true. You mean if they trusted you to book it yourself, you think you could actually do better than the federal government?
Especially overseas travel in some cases, sir.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, and we'll include that in our report. And it's an example of one big problem, which is our governmental systems are set up on the assumption that federal employees cannot be trusted to use good judgment or to make decisions. And there are, after all, other ways to prevent somebody from abusing the system. And if you give people incentives to make the best choices themselves, you're gonna save a lot of money. You're going to eliminate a lot of unnecessary paperwork, and you're going to eliminate a lot of wasted time. You fill out those forms on taxpayers' time, correct?
Yes, we do, sir.
All right, thank you. Another example of unproductive, unnecessary restrictions, regulations, guidelines that just don't seem to work very well. Right here, in front. And then we'll go to you. Yes, ma'am. She has the microphone.
Good morning. Something as simple as correspondence. I've been with the government a long, long time, and each agency has its own rules and regulations based on some higher guidance, of course, about how correspondence should be done. And I think if we really took the time to figure this out, we would find that it is extremely costly to get one piece of correspondence out of an agency. So I think that that's something that we all need to look at.
Well, give me an example, specific example.
Okay, the layering that we have as far as, once an action officer does the action, all right, it may come back in an indefinite amount of time for something like a comma. I'm not advocating carelessness.
Who's applauding a comma? Are you? Has that happened to you? Give him a microphone too. You keep yours. Go ahead. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say I'm certainly not advocating inefficiency or shoddy work, but I just think that that's really something that is costing the government a lot of money.
Okay. You had one sent back because of a comment?
Well, I guess I'm going to take a little bit of so it's nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. You didn't expect to be talking today, did you?
No, sir, I didn't. But I've had some ideas on things that could be fixed. I think the elders have passed through. In correspondence, the thing that fascinated me is there seems to be an inverse relationship based on how high rank the person is signing it as to how many times it has to be reaccomplished. And the fascinating thing is, from meeting some of those high-ranking officers, they don't really want that to happen.
Yeah.
So it's very fascinating. Or, actually, I think even the vice president, if we were writing him a letter, we make absolutely positively sure here that it's perfect for Secretary Ashton. However, I think you wouldn't mind a pen and ink change from Secretary Ashton.
That's true. I got one the other day, actually.
But as long as you give me the chance to speak, I'll bring up mine.
Go ahead.
And that was a U.S. airplane.
Okay.
But, sir, I think it's really rather fascinating. When I first came to Washington, I heard a statistic that each day in the Washington metropolitan area, 1 million people commute into the metropolitan D.C. area and 750,000 automobiles. And I think we could probably establish some type of rule or some type of goal, perhaps, to begin letting some of the people in the Pentagon who know how to do their jobs and could probably do them at home, stay at home and do it.
Okay. All right, thank you. Thank you very much. I wanted to make let me make a comment about that, and then I promise to call on this gentleman here. In the private sector, well, how many people here have an electronic mail-type hookup at home and actually do some of your office work at home? Could I see a show of hands? Okay. All right. I want to come back to this question of electronic mail, but I wanted to make a comment here on the comma. The federal government appears to be terrified that someone will make a mistake. And most, or an awful lot of the command and control systems of the federal government seem to be designed to put federal employees in a straitjacket of rules and regulations, partly because of the effort to make absolutely certain that there is no mistake. High-performing organizations in the private sector typically look upon mistakes as opportunities to learn. And they feel there's a trade-off. If you encourage people to have a little more creativity and autonomy and look for new and better ways to do things, you have to accept the fact that there are going to be some mistakes that are made. That's how an organization learns. If the organization tightens up so much in an effort to prevent any kind of mistake, it never tries anything new, it doesn't learn, the people who work for it don't grow and evolve and develop better ways to do things more efficiently. A high-performing organization endeavors to learn continually. And with the rapidly changing set of circumstances we face, organizations have to try to learn continually. Now, if you have, repeated serious mistakes, you got to do something about it, obviously. But mistakes in and of themselves don't have to cause the kind of reaction that they do now. I visited a lot of companies in the private sector that are known for doing things extremely well. I went to Southwest Airlines, for example, and they celebrate famous mistakes. And they joke with the person who made the mistake to help get him past it, but in the process, the whole organization learns what can be learned from that mistake. Now, there's some particular tasks that, where you have to have zero tolerance, but in, things like correspondence, for example, maybe things can be done a little differently. Yes, you had a hand up. Yes, sir.
I'm concerned that a lot of the cumbersome personnel practices that we have and salary practices are cutting off a source of entry of new talent. One example, I had a young college intern working for me part-time. It's relatively easy to hire them. And he was a tractor jack, and he wanted to work for the government. When he tried to apply, he had an incredible difficult time, but he was told that because he was a good computer specialist, he didn't have a high enough, you need a 3.5 GPA to qualify to be hired as a GS7. He would have been qualified to be hired as a GS5 because he didn't get a high enough grade in some of his other related classes. He eventually accepted a job with a private sector corporation at the equivalent of a GS11 GPA. mid-level.
Yeah.
And with these kinds of practices, what's happening is we're not going to be getting the best and the brightest. We're going to be lucky to get anybody. When you start drying up the course of your new talent, what's the corporation or the institution going to look like in another 10 years?
Now, let me be clear. You're telling me there's some problems with the personnel system in the federal government?
A few.
That's an astounding revelation. How many different job classifications are there? Do you know? Federal government? Anybody know?
I know there's a bookshelf.
450. I've got a picture in my office of all of the regulations that govern personnel, and it would be a stack about this high covering this whole open space here. It's ridiculous. The comparable body of rules and regulations in the Saturn Corporation, for example, is a pamphlet 20 pages long. Typically, the high-performing organizations that I've referred to have a lot more flexibility, and people can move more freely from one job to the next. And the hiring practices that you started talking about are they're monitored by OPM. Another one of those large, centralized command and control agencies in the federal government that was set up in part because individual managers are not to be trusted to make decisions. You wanted to hire that guy.
Yep.
And you knew, based upon the work that you have to do in your office, that he was ideally suited for the job you wanted to hire him for, correct?
Yes.
But what do you know? You just work there. Are you partly in charge of that office?
Yes, sir.
Well, why would they be interested in your opinion of who is best suited for that job, when we can instead set up a very elaborate mountain of regulations and do it by the book? There was a time when that seemed efficient and clever and the best way to approach problems like this. But that time is past. Wouldn't it make sense to give more flexibility to managers to make these kinds of decisions, or at least to have input into them? And what you say about people coming into the federal government is also true of people who want to move from one part of the federal government to another part of the federal government. Would anybody here be interested in doing a different job, but you feel like you're locked and you don't have the lateral movement that... let's talk about personnel a little bit more. Anybody else have... yes, ma'am, right here.
My name is Beth Granger. It's a pleasure to meet you. I'm not sure exactly what needs to be done, but the performance review system that everyone goes through every year, every SES or every secretary, every GM has to not only project that they can walk on water, but actually do it if you believe what you read on the performance review system. And it takes you days of writing and whatnot. It just seems like it could be simplified. I'm not sure exactly what needs to be done with it. But
how many people in your office are eligible for the rank of outstanding?
Well, everyone.
How many people get it in 1 year? What I'm trying to ask is, how many people can get that designation in a given year? In most offices, I think that it's only one, isn't it? How many are there in smaller units? It is. Is there? Well, let me get to the point that I'm asking about this. Is there destructive competition in this to get these kinds of designations?
I just think it's a lot of bureaucratic red tape when it probably could be simplified. Not sure exactly what needs to be done to make it much simpler, but years ago, you were either satisfactory, unsatisfactory, or marginal. Mm-hmm. And now it's just out of control.
Mm-hmm. All right, very good. Anybody else want to make a comment on that? Yes, sir.
Not of a further, sir. Thank you. My wife works for the FDA, and everybody here gets evaluated once or twice a year. It amazed me, out of all the government agencies that there are, that there's probably a different personnel evaluation form for every agency. Seems like to me it would be a lot simpler to make a standard or pretty close to a standard form for every personnel out there, whether they're offshore enlisted, whether they're management or otherwise.
All right. Thank you, sir. Now, let me ask a related question. Does anybody here work in an office where there is a shortage of people who actually do the work and a surplus of middle managers? You middle managers are not applauding. Anybody here have an experience of working in an office where the key to the office working was a secretary? I'm talking about the different kind of secretary now. A secretary who knew what everybody needed when and knew the whole operation, and the office just worked like a Swiss clock because of this one individual, but she or he got to a point where there was no further reward for the excellence achieved, and then either left or got reclassified to go into some other occupation that he or he wasn't really as well suited for, and the office just kind of, went into the doldrums. You want to tell me about that? Anybody? Yes, ma'am. Bring the microphone here.
Yes, sir. I have an employee who's now a position, and is Donna Carlson, and she went through that a couple of years ago. We tried to get her promoted, and the system was so cumbersome that we could not get her promoted, even though she deserved it, and the office needed someone like her to, she should have been rewarded for what she was doing, and she wasn't. She did things above and beyond what her job description called for. Unfortunately, she is leaving federal service today. Today's her last day. Matter of fact, her luncheon's at 11:30. And she's leaving government service today, partially, I think, because we weren't able to reward her the way she should be for the things that she's accomplished for.
Is her luncheon here in the Pentagon?
No, sir, it's not, but I'll tell you where it is if you're interested.
Thank you, Colonel. I was just going to say that I'd like to meet her and learn more about the experience. In one of those windows? Standing in the window. Does she know you're talking about her? Well, in any event, thank you, because that illustrates the point that I was making very well. I have a friend named Francis Preston, who is the head of Broadcast Music Incorporated, one of the largest entertainment corporations that represents artists. She has offices around the world. She's a fantastic chief executive. She started as the receptionist in a radio station in Nashville, Tennessee. She went to be a clerk in the mailroom. She then became a secretary for one of the people in the front office. And she worked her way up, and at each level, she demonstrated a superior ability to master every task that was given to her, and she made every office she worked in just hum and be a high-performing office. And she was rewarded, and she gradually climbed up the ladder, and now she's running this huge organization. Federal employees ought to have the same opportunity. They ought to have the chance to be rewarded for superior performance, not just with bonuses, but with opportunities to grow and to change and to take on more challenges. But our personnel system, the way it operates today, simply does not encourage that, especially at the lowest rungs on the ladder. And that really ought to be changed. We ought to give managers more flexibility, and we ought to give employees more opportunity in the federal government. Now, let's talk for a minute about, did you want to say something on this? Yeah, go ahead. Can you get the microphone? He's standing behind the rope there in the shade.
I'm a temporary employee, and I have been trying to get on with the government for 2 years.
You're what employee?
A temporary.
Yes, ma'am.
And all of my supervisors all the way up have tried to get me on, but because of CPA's rules and regulations, I can't get on. And we have more forms going throughout CPA than I can even recall. And they still are stopping this procedure. And I'm doing the work of 3 women because all of the jobs that have been abolished.
Yeah.
Is there any way to rectify this?
We're trying. Yes. I heard a story over at the Department of Education about a whole group of college honor students who came as interns to volunteer for the summer, and it took 6 weeks to process their paperwork. They missed half of their summer's free work for the taxpayers because the system is so bottled up in paperwork and bureaucracy and red tape that it just couldn't get them on the job. It's absolutely crazy. What about these FTE ceilings? Anybody have work in an office where an FTE ceiling results in irrational decisions being made to contract out work that could be taken on much more cheaply by just having an additional lower paid employee? Anybody know of an example like that? That problem may appear a little bit differently here in the Defense Department. In the rest of the federal government, that is a serious problem. All right, let me ask about procurement. You all have been living with the problems of procurement, red tape, and regulations for a long time, and you've made a tremendous amount of progress. But when you acquire things, is there unnecessary red tape that leads to higher costs? Somebody laughed out loud back there. Yeah, give her the microphone.
Good morning, sir. I have observed over my career, I'm a secretary, but I have observed a problem in the supply system where you project out your calendar year, what you might need in the way, by the way of funds, and then if there's any left over, it's spent just on anything in fear of that the next year you won't get the same amount of money if you need it.
You're kidding. Has anybody else had that experience?
But the money is used and it's wasted because they feel if they don't use it up,
Yeah.
that the next year they won't get the money they need if they need it.
And federal employees are offended by that practice. You see it, you know it's wrong, and the system just doesn't seem... Now, there have been some creative ways to try to solve that problem, and our National Performance Review will be recommending some sweeping changes in that particular area, along with other areas, to try to change that problem. But give me a specific example. Did it happen this year?
Well, about 3 years ago, but it has happened since then. But this is the one that's very vivid in my mind. We had money left over in our budget, and it was spent on office furniture that we really didn't need, that the furniture that we had was sufficient. That's the only thing I can think of, just furniture and just little knickknacks and things that we really didn't need. And it was, as I observed, in my opinion, the money was wasted. It should have been turned in versus spent. If we didn't need it, turn it in.
Well, you can't carry over unobligated balances because of the requirement that it be turned in, and as a result, nothing is turned in. It's all spent. And the flip side of it is that federal managers often get 8 months into the fiscal year before they know what the budget is for the year they're operating in. And so there's no way to plan. There's no way to make intelligent decisions. They're forced to wait until the end of the fiscal year, and they store up ideas for quick purchasing at the end of the year because they know that the system drives toward that kind of outcome every single year. You think that's the way these high-performing corporations do it? Of course not. It's total insanity. Why do we do it that way? It needs to be changed. And federal employees in every department of the federal government have told me about this particular problem, and we are determined to change that problem. Now, as I said earlier, there have been some creative efforts to deal with that, but does anybody else want to talk about that particular problem? Yes, sir. Right here. Right in front of you here. Did you have your hand up back there, too? We'll go to you next.
Also, thank you, sir, and the Secretary, and thank you for being here. Appreciate the opportunity. I want a slightly different angle that it's not just us, sir. There are other things going on because we put out contracts, et cetera, and if we're not very, very specific about what we want, what the contractor delivers, we're stuck with. Contract law or whatever the results that come down from judges are always against us. It always is against the person requesting the information, the service or whatever. An example is this story, I guess, of the chocolate chip cookies. We asked for cookies, so the cookies came in no chocolate chips. Well, you didn't say each cookie had to have a chocolate chip. Now, it would make sense to me that if you would have chocolate cookies, you would have chocolate. But it was our fault because we didn't specify, and so we did. 16 chips, 8 cookies. What a story I read in one of the experiments, and I guess. Okay. And then we get hit, of course, by the press because we're gold plating or we're over-specifying things. It's not just like that. It's a two-way street. I'd like to see some integrity on the contractor side also to understand that what we want, it's give and take here.
Okay. All right. Very good. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. I had an example the other day from the General Services Administration buying ashtrays, talking about over-specification. And, well, it wasn't an ashtray. It was an ash receiver tobacco desk type. And it specified all of the measurements on all of the sides and so forth. And then it specified the testing procedure. And the test had to be performed with a maple plank. The plank on which it was laid had to be made out of maple. And the metal thing used for the test had to be 60 degrees, and you had to break it a certain way, and then it had to break into no more than 35 pieces. And each of the pieces was then, the size of the pieces was then specified. And what you're saying is, let me understand this a little bit better, that the game of over-specifying and getting into that ridiculous level of detail comes about because in part because of what the contractors do if you don't? Isn't there a better way to fix that than to continuing the cycle? Give them the microphone again. I'll get back to you, sir. Isn't there a better way to heal that relationship and instead of just making it worse?
I'm not sure of your thought process here, but to me it would be a dialogue allowing conversation between the contractors or proposed contractors and the RFP proposal. If I may flip to another example that was on National Public Radio was the two-page, I believe it was, specification for the right flyer. And it had things that were things that the seat will allow an average-sized man to be able to sit and reach the controls. The controls would be usable by a average intelligent person. Today that would never fly. You know, that contract law would take us apart. But if we have a requirement and the contractor says, well, this is what I'm going to deliver, you say, well, that's not going to handle it. Well, that's still within the scope of the contract. Okay, then the contractor then is still held to deliver what we want. But we're conversing back and forth and clarifying what it is what we want, as opposed to, no, you didn't ask for it, you're not going to get it. If you want it, it's $50,000 for any contract modification right off the bat.
Well, you know, there are all kinds of lawsuits in the private sector, and the Uniform Commercial Code and other bodies of law govern, and yet the high-performing companies that have subcontractors spend a lot of time with their subcontractors and develop the kind of dialogue that you suggest so that there is a common understanding of exactly what is expected on both sides before they get into the dispute resolution phase, and that's avoided. And the federal government has to move in that direction and get out of its regulatory, bureaucratic, highly detailed specification game. Yes, sir.
Morning, sir. My name is Douglas Van Dorp, and I'm in the contracting career field. And I see a problem that I think everybody here can appreciate no matter what they do, and it really boils down to computers versus paper. Now, I'm in a specialty where we write government contracts and we administer them, and every time we do something, we've got to make a paper copy. So it occurs to me, in order to cut down paper, I mean drastically, why can't we create, well, we do create solicitations and contracts in our computers, word processing, spreadsheets, but we always have to crank out a hard copy, a paper copy, and they go into these brown folders, and they're big, and they get big, and I can imagine some of the contracts on a B-2 bomber or a nuclear submarine, there's just hundreds of these folders.
Bigger than the submarine.
Yes. So why don't we permit just electronic contracts? In other words, when we prepare a solicitation and the commercial world wants to bid on it, they have to have a computer. We're going to send it to them on a floppy disk. They get it, and if they don't have a computer, they can't do any business with it. And, I mean, this applies not just in the federal government, in state government, county government, and I even think that big corporations have it. Now, that's the problem, and I would suggest, I always like to offer a solution. It may not be a good one, but we're governed by the FAR, Federal Acquisition Regulation, and perhaps it would be good, and they're doing a good job. I don't want to get on anybody's case, but perhaps it would be good if we would...
They like you. They speak well of you, too.
Probably what we need to do, sir, is to allow electronic solicitations and contracts, and unless there has to be a paper copy, there won't be any.
I like that idea. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
I like that idea a lot, and we're exploring some similar related ideas. Some private organizations have created electronic bidding and electronic marketplaces, and one of the things they found is that smaller vendors find that kind of procedure much more accessible. They get much more competition, many more creative bids, lower cost, higher quality. In many places it has worked extremely well. The larger question you raised about substituting digital information for paperwork is, of course, a major theme among many that we're pursuing, and we have a cross-cutting task force just on information technology, and we're exploring things like electronic signatures, digital electronic signatures, coded, of course, ways to have contracts and checks and other things transferred electronically. One thing that new technology does in making organizations more efficient is in empowering employees to think in new ways about the way they fit into an organization. For example, let me ask this question of all of you here. How many people here use electronic mail regularly in your work? Okay. How many people here would like to but can't? Okay. How many people here can easily think of how many people here can easily think of an electronic mail network that you could use to make your work much more efficient that doesn't exist in the Defense Department today? Okay, let's have a contest. What's the best one? Did you have your hand up, Tom? Did you? Do you want to offer an idea on this, or anybody? Who can think of the best network that ought to be set up? Yes, sir. Bring your microphone up here. I kind of nudged you into it. I'm sorry. You might not have wanted to.
Well, Vice President General McInerney, the future holds for us to be interneted in this whole building electronically. and paper will gradually disappear. Most modern high-powered companies are doing that, then tied in with the electronic highway if you talk internet. I talk to people at Apple out in industry all the time. And as a matter of fact, I'll be so bold to say in 10 years the post office will be down greatly, and most of this will go by electronically once the highways go through. We could lead this, and as you want to do, lead it in the federal government. We could lead it in the Defense Department with you.
Well, General, thank you, and thank you for your leadership on I should have acknowledged you earlier, for your leadership on the reinvention team and the efforts here in the Pentagon. It has really been an outstanding effort, and I appreciate that very much. Couple of quick examples of offices that you are not connected to by electronic mail now, that if you were connected to them, you could eliminate a lot of paperwork, do your job much more efficiently. Right here.
Thank you. Michael Campbell. I work for the Office Secretary of Defense in executive personnel, and I need to talk to other agencies through my computer more.
Okay.
We hire people when people leave. We really need to do that.
Okay. Good suggestion. It would be nice if we had electronic mail throughout the federal government. Yes, ma'am, right here, and then somebody back there behind the rope is very, very anxious. Why don't you take him first, okay? Give the microphone to our interpreter here.
Okay, I'm highly in support of electronic mail because as a deaf individual, I cannot contact and call other hearing people through the different agencies or within this agency and organization. Through email, I can contact everyone easily, and that really helps 100% equal access. Thank you.
Thank you. Over here. Yes, ma'am. He'll bring you the microphone. Hold on just a second. Try the other one.
Working? Okay. I'm very interested in the work-family relationship that the high-performing civilian companies are very involved in. And it would be very helpful if we in the government could talk to them electronically, get the most updated information, and employ it here too.
Oh, very good. That's a very interesting suggestion. Right here.
Mr. Vice President, I'm Martha Van Note. I work for the Inspector General of the Department of Defense, and I handle the general account. Correct. I handle the General Accounting Office surveys and reviews. We provide liaison with the General Accounting Office for the Department of Defense. We need really to be, we're over in another building across the street. We need to be able to talk by email with the people in the department as well as with the General Accounting Office, and we don't have that capability.
Okay. Let me ask, let's take one more here, and then I want to ask one final series of questions. Oh, good. Okay. Thank you. Go ahead.
Colonel Sharper, Joint Staff. So I think one of the big technological advances that are out there in the commercial market right now are those systems called groupware. Those systems allow users to synergistically review documents, to share of ideas and information, to produce products, and I think certainly with the opportunity to apply that type of technology universally in the government, would have the ability to harness our workforce, to allow people to surface their ideas in a constructive fashion on a team basis and effectively do the job better efficiently.
Thank you very much. That's a great suggestion. Lieutenant Colonel Roderick, is that your name? Your friend who was standing in the window, you've managed to get her down here. Come on up here. Bring your microphone. Thank you. 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 give you a great going-away party, Donna. And thank you for your work in the federal government. Now, did you hear what you said earlier? She said you do an absolutely fantastic job. The office works extremely well because of what you have done, but it has become impossible for you to get rewarded above a certain level, and so now you're going elsewhere. Is that basically right? You want to? Do you think that? Do you want to? Is probably not the right question because you didn't expect to be asked to say anything. But here's the point that I'm trying to get at. I want to understand more about this situation where people who do a really good job in the lower grade level and make the organizations they work for do an excellent job. When people don't feel like they can advance further within the federal government, then they have to go elsewhere, and the federal government loses the benefits of the experience that you've gained, the talents that you've learned, and the office where you work suffers as a result of not being able to reward. You understand the point that I'm making? Tell me some of your feelings about that.
On top of the reason I'm leaving federal government is because my husband is PCSing to Korea. And he's at Waka. So we decided that with me not being able to move out, that it was probably best that I moved and let someone else take the job that could move out. And maybe I find a job and wait for him until he comes back next year, and then we'll go to his next duty assignment.
You're not going with him.
No, I'm not going with him. I'm moving to North Carolina.
I see. But the main factor in your leave, that affected your timing, not your decision to leave, correct?
Yeah.
But your decision to leave came about because you can't advance anymore.
That's correct.
And the organization, Colonel, really needs her, correct?
Our special needed.
Say that again.
It's not just the organization, it's our special needed. I depend on it 100%. She's always there and takes care not just me, but the rest of the action officers, and makes sure that we get the job done right.
And
She's trained all of us.
She's trained you? Is that right? How long have you been there?
4 years.
Yeah.
In the office.
Well, good luck to you. Thank you very much. Good luck in your new job. Thank you very much. Be sure and tell your husband about today, what happened today. And Colonel, thank you for showing the initiative to get that. You know, there are lots of stories like hers in the federal government. It is extremely common. And we are losing the benefit of the creative ideas. You similar story? Okay, hold on just a second.
My name is Carolyn Superman. I work for the Army's Community and Family Support Center, which is here in Washington. And I want to comment on several things that have been going on here. I personally have been working on personnel issues for a long time, and this is one of the issues that we're always talking about, is how do we keep people, how do we keep them satisfied? When I was in graduate school, which was a while ago, we had a list of things that benefits that employees want out of their companies, and it was a laundry list. And people in my class worked for, because it was graduate school, they already worked for IBM, Xerox, PRC, a lot of big companies, including the Army. And there were military officers as well as civilians. Now, among those benefits included sports activities, child care, educational opportunities, whatever it was according, plus salary, housing, transportation, whatever. I want to tell you that the Army or the military came out number one out of all those companies for benefits. I congratulate you for that, that's for sure. But that was for the military, not for the civilian. I, being a civilian, I was in Europe at the time, but I did have a lot of those benefits because they do give those benefits to civilians who serve overseas. And what I found out throughout the years is that a lot of the reasons that people leave, as military and otherwise, has something to do with their families, has something to do with the way that you can operate in keeping your home life going and your work life going, not just money, but the opportunity to be with yourself. And the Army and all the military did a fantastic job during Desert Storm. Absolutely. Our organization was the numbers that you called on CNN, that took care of the families and found out where your paycheck was and did all this other stuff. So we take care of families in one respect. But when my child is sick at school, or if I have to go to a teacher conference, I take leave, or I have to adjust my schedule. And I think that if you're really going to be creative in reinventing government, you're going to have to figure out a way to get parents involved in the education of their children by not being in prison for 8 hours a day, not being able to go to their children's activities, putting them in daycare. The military has a fantastic daycare program. The civilians have a very sorry one, I can tell you that. I worked on a study with federally employed women, and we found that out of all of the agencies in the United States, all federal, not just the military, that there were maybe 2,000 civilian children in daycare out of 1 million employees. Okay? And the big companies that you're talking about, they provide child care. They provide opportunities. But I'm challenging you to find something even more creative. Why can't I go to school with my children? Why can't I be with them more? And I know that you are in charge of education as well, so get them thinking on it. And why can't we communicate with them electronically? My kid would probably go crazy if I sent an electronic message and said, "Hi, how are you doing?"
No, okay. Thank you very much. Thank you. Those are a lot of great ideas. Part of the problem is that we haven't had good ways to measure the performance and the output of the individuals and the organizations in the federal government. And as a result, we measure the input instead. We measure the amount of money that goes into the budget. We measure the amount of time that federal employees put in the office, and that's how we manage, largely. Whereas the better way to do it is to measure the outcomes, not the input. And if federal employees know that they're going to be held accountable for the performance of the office of which they're a part, if the manager has the flexibility to create a team and exploit the creativity and talents of the men and women who are part of that team, and then look at the output and the performance, then that allows more flexibility to employees to work at home some of the time if that's electronically possible and more efficient, to set more flexible hours. How many people here work on time clocks or time sheets? You have to sign in and sign out. Could I see a show of hands on that? Most people? Well, in the federal government, it's very common, and that's very uncommon in most high-performing organizations in the private sector. In any event, let me ask one other series of questions briefly, and then we're going to have to close. I apologize for running a little bit over. I'd like to hear briefly about a few success stories, because there are a lot of them. In spite of the regulations and the obstacles and the procedures, I mentioned the Air Combat Command. I mentioned General McInerney's work. I mentioned some other things that the Defense Department has been doing. You've been innovators. You've been leaders. I'd like to hear a couple of success stories that started with an idea in the mind of a federal employee that was then implemented and resulted in the saving of taxpayer money or the improvement of the quality of service provided. Anybody? Yeah, right there.
Is it on?
Yeah.
I work in a classified office, but someone in our office several years ago came up with an idea of why do all the services work on similar ideas on their own and not share the technology. And there was a program developed in our office that is sort of like a library. And what it does is all the services can go there and look at the special technology, and if they have someone developing something, they share it, and it saves millions and millions of dollars of development.
And the idea started with one federal employee.
Actually, he was a military officer, but yes.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. That's a great example. Way in back there. Way in back. Do we have a microphone back there? Yes, sir.
Thank you very much, and we appreciate your coming. My name is Robert Lozar. I'm from the Corps of Engineers on assignment here in the Pentagon. Several years ago, our laboratory decided to try to make a computer mapping system available. We developed the software. It's called the GIS, the Geographical Information System, and named it GRASS, the Geographical Resource Analysis Support System. We made it publicly available throughout the government. Today, it's the most widely used non-commercial GIS in the U.S., common throughout the government, common throughout universities, and the payback on it has always been highly positive. So we're very proud of that, and thank you for the opportunity.
Congratulations. Thank you.
I'd like to make a small comment in that area. What we see, as has been said before, the lack of encouragement for people to continue the creative atmosphere that allowed that to occur concerns me and most of the people at my lab. And if you could address that a little bit, we'd certainly appreciate it.
Well, we intend to, and that stimulates one final question. How many of you have had, I think that we could go on for quite some time with success stories, and I apologize for not being able to get to all of them, but let me ask this question. How many of you have had creative ideas that would have saved money or improved the quality of service, but you didn't venture the idea because you were afraid you'd get your head chopped off, and so you just said, there's no use, I'm not going to. Could I see hands on that? Quite a few hands. Those are opportunities missed. Those are new innovations that were never even tried because of what you cite, sir. The system does not encourage innovation sufficiently. It is so obsessed with avoiding any kind of mistake, with the rigid rules and requirements and guidelines and regulations, that federal employees are given the impression that new and better ways of doing things really aren't that welcome. Now, that's not true in all parts of the federal government, and it's certainly not true in all parts of the Defense Department. We've heard a few success stories. We could hear a lot more. Let me just close with these comments. We're going to do our best this fall in presenting a comprehensive report on how the federal government can change, be reinvented, if you will, take advantage of the new approaches that high-performing organizations in the private sector have made work very well, how we can empower federal employees to use their creativity and their intellect to help the organizations of which they're a part do better and become customer-friendly, if you will, and respond to the person or organization to whom the service is delivered and learn from the transaction. We're going to try to point the way to a system that will measure output and performance rather than input, a system that will be high quality, high performing at lower cost. In all of this, we're going to rely on you for the ideas, such as the ones you've shared here today, ideas that I hope you will share on a continuing basis, and we're going to rely on you to implement the new suggestions that will be forthcoming in the fall. The ones that can be accomplished by executive order, which is likely to be the majority of them, will be implemented by President Clinton, who is totally committed to this exercise, as he has said a number of times. Those that require legislative action, we're going to ask the Congress to enact on an expedited basis. Those that require changes within a department, the cabinet secretaries who have been involved in this from the very beginning, and Secretary Ashton has been a very creative and helpful partner to me in this exercise, and I want to thank them for that. Those changes will be implemented by each member of the cabinet. So I want to close by thanking you for participating in this exercise here today, for serving your country as you do, and for your help on a continuing basis to try to transform the federal government and the way the federal government does business. Mr. Secretary, thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much.
your helpful ideas. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. Appreciate it.